So good morning, I'm Rick Dimmer with the City of Seattle's Finance and Administration Office.
Good morning, I'm Sherry McLeod, also with Finance and Administrative Services.
So today we're here to gather feedback from our communities to help guide us in this work in this cannabis industry. And so we're going to make some acknowledgments. First, let's acknowledge that us as a city have created some unintended impacts for communities of color around cannabis industry. And we started this work almost about this RET, basically what it is a racial equity toolkit, about 2 years ago to see what we've missed, what blind spots we have in, and what we need to do to make some corrections there. So we reached out at that time to several of you that I already see in the audience, the Hollingsworth, the Black Cannabis Alliance, and that was just part of the engagements. We've actually been through about eight or nine different stakeholder engagements. This is one of those stakeholder engagements, and we'll probably have several more. So really what we want to do is we want to be mindful and intentful of how we do this work. And traditionally, moving away from the traditional way that the city does business, which is we create policies and programs, and then we share that with community once it's already done. And so we want to be mindful of that to flip that paradigm and include community before this even happens, so that we're doing it right by you, and we have the outcomes that you want to see. Because at the end of the day, you're our taxpayers and we work for you. So we acknowledge that, and we're going to get it right. So let us use this space and this time with the folks that we have here to make sure that we guide this conversation around those things. How do we do better as a city to serve you as a community, okay? We are better equipped to impact racial inequities by building with the community and centering our conversations and our work around community and our day-to-day work, and creating programs and policies that's going to impact you. So let us build together. Just be mindful that's what we're here to do, is build together towards a more equitable cannabis industry for Black and brown communities. So some more acknowledgements. On behalf of the City of Seattle, we acknowledge that this land that we stand on today is traditionally home of the Coastal Salish people, traditional home of all tribes within the Duwamish and Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this place and this dialogue. We ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. Let us also acknowledge the African slaves whose back this country was built on, as well as the cannabis industry. We also want to acknowledge the businesses that were harmed, the communities that were harmed, and we also want to acknowledge our public officials that are in the room, our esteemed panelists, and also all the folks who are working on this racial equity toolkit with us. There's about, how many do we have, Sherry? About 9 or 10 people that are working on this racial equity toolkit. So just some house rules here. In case there is an emergency, let's see, the exits are there, and then she had said that the restrooms are on the third floor? Third floor and first floor for restrooms. So if you guys need anything, please let us know. So the layout for today's program is going to be from 10 to 12. We're going to have panelist conversation. There will be no break, so feel free to come and go, ebb and flow. If you guys need to get up, stretch, grab a snack. Remember, snacks are not allowed in here. They're going to be kept out in those spaces out there. So that's downstairs near the lobby by the table. And we got that there, so we're good here. All right. So before we get started, because this is a community engagement, and that's what we're here to do, is engage with you all, let's think about how we share this space and use this space to the best of our time. So we're asking that we have these community agreements. So you put up the, oh, I'm sorry, sure, you got the clicker for me. Community agreements. So community agreements is basically what we're asking of, and we all have to be in agreement so that we can move forward and build together. So we're asking that we all listen actively, seek to understand, make sure that every voice is, that we identify that every voice is important, and speak from your own experience. Is there at least one other community agreement that you all want added to this forum? We're all good? So are we all in agreement by show of hands that we can make this work today? We're all good? Perfect, I appreciate you, thank you. And to my elders in the room, just permission to speak. I come from, I'm raised by a Southern grandmother, so for my elders in the room, permission to speak. Appreciate that head nod. All right, thank you. All right, and just some reminders. Please hold all your questions to the Q&A portion. We will have a Q&A portion of the program. Feel free to write down your questions if you don't feel comfortable coming up. So we will have the mics on the sides where you guys will be asked to speak, come up and speak. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, put it in the box. We're going to be taking all this feedback that we get from you before this social equity program happens. So we're going to talk more about it, but basically we identified that there are social equity programs in other states, and we wanted to have one here in Seattle. So before we get into all that, we need to figure out from you if you even want it. Do you want more marijuana licenses here, right? Do you want these businesses in your community? And what does that look like? And also, what does it look like to address the incarceration part of it, right? For folks who were incarcerated, is there some work that we need to do around that? Sure, we have vacated sentences, but let's put those lives back together, right? Let's create some job opportunities, some training, some funding for all those things, clothing, work tools, whatever else that community says that we need to hear that from you, okay? So let's get into it. So our first up, we're gonna have Miss Elisa Young.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here representing the Department of Finance and Administrative Services as the new Equity and Policy Director. At FAS, we lead with race, and our director, Calvin Goings, has committed in this space by creating a lead position in his office to embed equity in all that we do. We currently lead the city's race and social justice initiatives through 8 racial equity toolkits, the most in the entire city. With 15 divisions, we have a very diverse lines of businesses that really create more opportunity for us to address many of the systemic racial barriers that exist. FAS regulates the cannabis industry through marijuana licensing. And in 2018, as Rick alluded to, FAS created the Equity in Marijuana Business Licensing Project, where they created the Racial Equity Toolkit team, which is led by both Sherry and Rick. As the cannabis industry grows, it is our civic duty as public servants to address the long-term impacts that these cannabis enforcement policies have had on African Americans and other minorities, whether it be creating deliberate entry points into the industry or seeking justice for those whose lives have been impacted by marijuana-related incarceration or criminal convictions. Today, FAS hopes to learn and hear from you to help us determine how to achieve new opportunities to move forward. We really thank you for being here today.
Now we're going to have Ms. Kiana Wheeler, our organizational change strategist.
Morning, folks. So I work with the City of Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative. That initiative's goal is to undo institutional racism and ensure that racism is not an indicator for success in our organization, but also in our community. What we do at the Office of Civil Rights is we support departments such as FAS, Finance and Administrative Services, in their racial equity work. So I consider myself an anti-racist educator rather than an organizational change strategist. And I just want to talk a little bit about why we center race in the conversation. There's a couple reasons why the City of Seattle's Race and Social Justice Initiative, we use RSJI for short. There's a couple reasons why RSJI begins with race. We lead with race. One of those reasons are because no one's willing to talk about race. Everyone's willing to take race off the table for other isms such as gender or ability or heterosexism. Folks are willing to take race off the table and talk about other isms. But what's misunderstood is that race and other isms are tied to a base of power. And if we can address how race is a part of this conversation at the jump, we can address all of the other isms because they all stem from the same root of power. Another reason why we center race is because within every other issue that we talk about, let's say the city often talks about homelessness or pay inequity or other gaps. What folks don't understand is that within those issues, race is a salient factor. Race is one of the things that keeps LGBTQ issues from moving forward because of the racial divide, that keeps gender and feminist issues from moving forward because of the racial divide. And so if we can't talk about race, we actually can't do any of this. The other reason that the Race and Social Justice Initiative leads with race is because race at its core is intersectional. When we do racial equity toolkits and whatnot, the question we're asking is who's most harmed? And if who's most harmed does not include an understanding of Black and brown issues, then unfortunately we're never going to get to an issue that lifts up and changes race as a measurement of success. Does that, folks understand what I mean? So my work is to support this effort at the Office of Civil Rights, to support all departments as they begin to lead with race and to help have that conversation so that we can begin with a standard that we often push away from. Thank you.
Good morning again. Thank you, Kiana, and thank you, Elisa, for coming in this morning. And I wanted to thank everybody very much for showing up here today. I just wanted to briefly thank my team. We have been working on this project for nearly 20 months. It seems like 20 years. And we have made great partnerships, partnering with the state, several of the other city departments, and actually reached out all across the U.S. Just checking. So how we're going to proceed is I'll just talk a little bit about our project, Rick and I, and then we will have a Q&A session after this. So if you have some questions, please feel free to point out. And Mike Chevelle Mike with a mic will come to you, and you can ask us your questions. Okay. Thank you. In addition, so this was just brought to light to me in the last couple of days, and I hadn't realized the impact that it could potentially have on an individual. There are some flyers downstairs out front, and it has to do with immigration status. The Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs did reach out to us when they learned we were putting on this event, and the main concern is just admitting to having used cannabis could actually affect your status as an immigrant. So we do have flyers downstairs in English, we have it in Spanish, and we have it in Chinese. Unfortunately, we weren't able to access any additional flyers, but I did want to put that out there today, should anybody in the audience have some questions. And one of the recommendations we received was that if you are an immigrant and you desire to be an employee at a business, a cannabis business, or want to get into this industry, is to check with an immigration attorney first and make sure that you are going to be protected to do what it is that you'd like to do. So with that, Elisa was kind enough to share a little bit about our project. So we did form our project team in June of 2018, and this was after our department, FAS, had been working with the industry for about, almost 3 years, licensing them and just trying to get folks licensed and operating and keep track. And it's been a wild ride, to say the least. But when we took a closer look, and we started noticing this during the transition in 2016 when medical dispensaries had to close and be licensed with the state if they wanted to continue operating, that the ownership had changed dramatically. The faces that we had seen previously operating the stores throughout Seattle were no longer evident anymore. We had talked to some of these people at the time, and they were trying to achieve licensing. They had applied, they had found their location, so just like everybody else, it was a bit of a scramble. But for the most part, very few of the people who had been operating here in Seattle, to be honest, of all colors, were able to continue operating in Seattle. So as I mentioned, we did notice that there was definitely a dearth of people of color operating our businesses here. And then we started noticing that around the country, as other states came online with legalization, they had built in an equity framework from the start, and to address the very same problems, because they had noticed the same issues, at least with the preceding medical industry, that different cultures, different races were not represented in the industry. So part of our engagement, our first engagement, was actually we called all of our medical providers that we still had phone numbers for to learn, were they successful in achieving licensing? Were they successful in achieving a license in Seattle? What was their experience like to go through the licensing process? What were their barriers and hurdles that they had to try to overcome? And then for some of them who weren't able to license in Seattle or not license at all, we did ask, would you be willing, if the opportunity should come again, would you be willing to try again? And it was actually very unfortunate. Most of them said no. They felt the experience was so difficult and so cumbersome that they were unwilling. I'm hoping now with some of the changes going on with the House bill in the state that people change their mind. So part of our process is we have to engage with the community, with our stakeholders, with the industry, with advocacy groups, with other departments, with other cities, with other states. As we've continued, our list of stakeholders have grown and grown and grown. I believe this is our 9th stakeholder engagement. This is the biggest by far. Oftentimes we have invited people to come in to meet with us. Like I see Joy Hollingsworth in there. She brought her whole family in to meet with us, which was wonderful and very considerate. And it actually really impressed upon me that there are a lot of people in this industry that want to see this change, who are willing to mentor people who are interested in going into this industry and work and have ideas and want to see this expansion. So as we continue with our engagements, we always try to get back to those who we have engaged with. So for instance, in this event, we will reach back out to you on our website, and if we do have your email address, we'll try to post the comments that we received today on that as well. So, I did promise data. So one of our engagements actually had to do with reaching out to jurisdictions around the country that either have an equity program in place or have one ready to go. When we reached out last summer, Illinois knew that they wanted to have an expansive, comprehensive equity program as part of legalization, but they didn't come online until January 1 of this year. But we did reach out to them as well. So we managed to put together, and we learned that although there are several programs out there right now, none of them have truly found success. And what we're hoping to do from that is taking a look and finding out what does work for them, what has been effective to help identify an equity applicant. How do you determine who should get a license, who shouldn't? What type of support do they require to be successful, not just to get the application submitted, which is a burden of its own, but stay in business and be successful. The additional research that we did involved looking at Seattle Municipal Court data. So part of what we knew we needed to do was identify the communities that have been most harmed. What we've learned through review of other cities and states programs is that oftentimes that's one of the criteria used, has to do with the community that the individuals from, were they impacted by the war on drugs more adversely so than other communities in their city. So taking a look at Muni Court data that we were able to obtain, and it does go back to 1996 through July of 2019, and we did identify several zip codes, and we went by zip codes. So this is zip codes of the individuals who were arrested or charged with a marijuana violation. So 98104, which actually that kind of surprised me, that's primarily downtown, has the most, followed by 98118, 98122, 98101, 98105, 98144, and then 98178, which is the Skyway area. So the zip codes I've read, they had to have had at least 100. So during that time, granted that's quite a few years, but they had to have at least 100 to qualify and show up on this list. So that's from 1998 through July of 2019. When we took a look at the data without, when we looked at the data through 2012, we saw that the difference was that prior to legalization, after legalization, 98104, the arrests and charges had increased for that neighborhood. So again, these aren't arrests that occurred there, but individuals listed those locations as theirs. Had gone down for 98118 and gone down for 98122 and down for 98144. So it's kind of interesting that after legalization, there's like a whole new areas that were impacted by this. And then leading back, I think a lot of you have, I alluded to that our industry here in Seattle, we were able to obtain from Liquor and Cannabis Board, were kind enough to share some data with us with regards to ownership, the race of owners for retail stores. So what we have right now, today we have about 45 stores open. This data, though, does go back to September of 2018, and at that time they were looking at 48 licenses. So at that time, the makeup, and this is self-identified by the applicant, and this would be the majority ownership, was 88% of the owners, or 42 stores, were owned by people who identified primarily as white on their applications. And again, this is within the Seattle city limits, and 0 for those identifying as black on the application. 1 store identified as Asian, 2 stores of Hispanic descent, and 3 stores of mixed. So it was an open answer, so people could put a variety of things. So sometimes they would just write mixed or, so I'm hoping as we move forward, we'll be able to better identify people. So there is definitely a problem. We know that's not reflective of the population in our city, and we know that is not reflective of the businesses that were operating before legalization. So we do hope to change that. And I'll let Rick talk.
So just a couple of things. Some of the legislative updates that we have, 2010, Attorney Pete Holmes stopped prosecution of Seattle's marijuana possession cases and dismissed all such cases. So we appreciate the prosecutor's office for making that work happen. In 2012, the 502, Initiative 502 passed by Washington State voters legalizing possession of small amounts of marijuana, followed by 2018, Mayor Jenny Durkin, and then again, as well, again, we see City Attorney Pete Holmes addressed the vacation of Seattle Municipal Court marijuana misdemeanor convictions. And then followed by 2019, Governor Jay Inslee announced his marijuana justice initiative in January, allowing individuals with 1 marijuana misdemeanor to apply for a pardon. So if that applies to you, please check the state's website and make sure that you guys are going through the process to do that. It is there for you to do it. And then followed by 2019, state legislature passed Senate Bill 5605, allowing the vacation of multiple marijuana misdemeanor cases. So again, like we are moving as a city forward and forward and forward. Right now it's misdemeanor. First it was just one, then it was multiple. So we're gonna keep continuing to do this work. Again, we need your feedback to do so. So make sure you guys share with us on what we need to do. So Sharon and I will take questions if you guys have any for about 5 minutes. Mike?
Thank
So
you.
if you guys just raise your hand, Mike will come to you. So while he's getting up there, so one thing we understand is that we need to have more licenses. The other thing is that there needs to be sustainability. So we're not gonna just, hand out a license, check a box and say the city did that, but we're also have partnered with the Office of Economic and Development. Bobby Lee was supposed to be here. I think he may be running late or might not show up, but we do have the support of the Office of Economic Development to give you guys all the technical pieces that you're gonna need to be sustainable. So it's one thing to have a license, we want you to stay in business. Mike?
Okay. And can everybody state their name and if they're part of community or affiliated with an organization? That would be helpful. Thank you. Please state your name.
Yeah, my name is Brion Corbray, and I used to own the Game Collective here in Seattle, Washington. And then federal prosecutor Jenny Durkin, who is now Seattle mayor, she worked with the state to basically run us out of business and put us out of business, threaten us with 20 years prison and $1 million fine. We were completely legal like everybody else around us. And so now we're here, I'm listening to these guys talk about the city, and we still haven't heard an apology from Jenny Durkin, who is now mayor, who should be apologizing to everybody in this room, and especially my family, for what she did to us as federal prosecutor. She was responsible for it, and so for us to sit up in here and bring her name up as a person that's working with this city, she caused these problems, okay? So she's not gonna be looking to clean up something that she caused. So if this social equity program is gonna work, I think she needs to apologize first to everybody in here. She needs to have her butt sitting right there apologizing, period.
So thank you, we appreciate your comment. And again, we're gonna take these comments back to the city and make sure that our folks are aware of the comments that community is sharing. I can't speak for the mayor and I can't speak for that time, but what we can say is that in the position that she's, I'm answering your question, sir. I'm just making a comment. But what we can say is that in a role as a prosecutor, that's one thing, and in a role as a mayor, that's another. And what we can say is that we do have the full support of the mayor's office to get this done. Because without the signature of the mayor's office, we wouldn't be able to have a social equity program, and we wouldn't be here starting with community before we even put any policies or practice in place. Next question.
Good morning, Rick. I want to thank both of you guys for setting up this forum, you and your team, giving us an opportunity to speak. There are a couple questions that I have here looking at these numbers. One, we pretty much understand why there was a disproportionate amount of individuals of non-ethnic relation opening up shops throughout King County. At the end of the day, the majority of consumers were minorities. The majority of people in line to get these licenses were non-minorities and individuals who had wealth. The other thing is I represent Fresh Start Professional Services, Youth Diversion, and my thing is how much of the money, of the proceeds that are being brought in from the sale of marijuana that's going to the state and the city is actually coming back to the community to help us educate and deal with the criminal justice problem that's coming out of the usage of marijuana.
Thank you, Franklin. So I know Franklin Smith personally, so he knows that when I'm in this seat for community, working for the city, that I do have communities full in mind when we do this work. So those are the things that we're addressing now. Again, we can't speak for what happened. What we can do is be here and be accountable for the unintended impacts that we have caused, and get on it. And so we knew we needed help from the King County Prosecutor's Office, the City Attorney's Prosecutor's Office, and from the Mayor's Office to do this work. So when we do ask for these funds that come from the Social Equity Program, we're gonna move to address things like that. How do we, for the folks who were incarcerated, how do we move funding to help those folks who were displaced, even in the prison system, now that they're released, folks who didn't have a home because they were incarcerated, folks who didn't have, they don't have the income now. So how do we use retraining work dollars? But those are things that we need to hear back from you, the ideas that, that you all have that we can share to move that money in those spaces. Can we get him on the microphone? Give me 1 second, Frank, because I want to make sure that so we're recording the comments so that we can take this feedback. This is all about feedback. Take this feedback, and when we start thinking about how we want to move this money, community said we need to move it over here. So that's what this is all about. And community says that we need worker retraining dollars. Community says we need to look at 13 to 18. Community says this is, and so as a city, that's how we need to act, right? So we need to capture your comment.
I have another question here. Could you say your name?
My name is Adam Powers. I represent a couple of different organizations. I started a nonprofit where we deal with technology. On that aspect of data-driven decisions, I know that you gave out some numbers. Do you have a program that can take those numbers, aggregate them, and put them on a dashboard so we can make data-driven decisions as a community and actually see these numbers you're referring to and like on a map so we have a better understanding versus just zip codes?
Sherry?
We can certainly try. So right now, that data is in the report. So if you go to the website for this event, there's a link to an equity report, a cannabis equity report, and the data is actually in that report. But I understand what you're asking for. I just don't necessarily have the resources to do that, but we can certainly try. Thank you.
Okay. Can you please state your name?
My name is Mary J. Henderson.
Oh.
My name is Mary J. Henderson, and I have a question and a statement, please. For one thing, where is the community? What community? And you read off a bunch of zip codes, but I live right across the street in 98122, and there's very few left of the African-American community there. But what I want to state is I am very interested in starting one of these businesses, but the bureaucracy that the city has, I know that's tough because I've got a couple loans from them in the past. And you have to understand, I've been here all my life. So I was here in the neighborhood when the Weed and Seed started. I'm never gonna forget Weed and Seed, never. Maybe no one in this neighborhood, in this age group remembers it, but it was when a bunch of black community organizations, like the Urban League, the Mayor Rice, they sacrificed many of our young youth for a few dollars. And it caused mass incarceration, it caused a lot of gang violence, black on black crime. So my concern is if the community is really going to be, it's never going to be revitalized here. It's never, that's not going to happen. So where is the community you're talking about? And how are we going to get these loans? Are they loans or are they grants? I want to know more about that.
Couldn't hear her last question.
So what she's asking is the funding part of it. So if we're going to support folks to get into the industry, so really there has to be some type of economic equity, right? So if we're saying that we want to be economically equitable, and we know that it costs money to start a business, and we're giving licenses to black and brown folks who may not have those funding, we are partnering with some financial institutions to help make that happen. So that we're still in the conversations of that, so we don't have all that laid out. Again, this social equity program hasn't even happened, but we wanted to come here first to see what it is that you need. We can think about it in the city, right, what we think you need, but that's how city makes mistakes, is by thinking what community needs and then creating programs to address that. What we need to do is hear what you need and then address that and put all the support in place to make that happen. So we've already laid down the groundwork when we think about economics, the support, the financial. We've talked to economic, the Office of OED to reach out to their partners who can do that, the financial, because the city can't give out that money, right? But we can reach out to those who can do that and then put you two together and then give you all the groundwork that it's gonna take to make that happen.
Okay, we have time for only one more question before we move on to our next speakers. And keep in mind, we have a comment period at the end too, so.
Good morning. My name is Paula Sardinas. I'm a commissioner with the Commission on African American Affairs. And I also have a lobbying firm. I represent about 21 different stakeholder groups representing probably close to 300,000 Washingtonians that the lack of social equity has impacted. So if you're a stakeholder group and you feel like your voice hasn't been heard and you're saying, how do we get a hold of these people? Paula Sardinas at Comcast.net. Rick and Cheryl, thank you for what you're doing. It is a holistic approach. I'm the only person in this room that has passed state and federal cannabis legislation in multiple states. I know how difficult it is. I'm working with cannabis coalitions in Massachusetts, Illinois, and California on how they got it wrong and making sure in Washington that we get it right. We're going to need a lot more support in King County. If you've got 0 African American owners, that is unacceptable. And so it is a holistic approach. It is education. It is an incubator. It is making sure that they can get the loans. It is making sure that Seattle is weighing in on legislation, saying we need to make this process less cumbersome for the people to access it. I know personally that people in Seattle are burned out. They're not interested because they're tired. So my question is, how can we work with you, or how can I work with you to make sure that the process this time works for all people and not just some of the folks?
Thank you, Paula. And with that, I think I'd like to bring up Ollie Garrett and Paula Sardinas. Ollie Garrett has many hats. She is president of Tabor 100, a local business association, and she's also the Liquor and Cannabis Board member who's been very involved in this equity project. And Paula Sardinas is a commissioner with the Washington State Commission on African American Affairs. Thank you. Please come up.
I want to thank the city for having us here today. And I want to thank all of you all for attending. I'm here representing the LCB to hear your voices and appreciate what the city is doing, because I have staff here today. We have folks from policy and from licensing to hear the comments that you're sharing today. I've been on the Liquor Cannabis Board for 3.5 years now. After hearing all of the comments from people who got left out of the industry, being here in the Seattle area, being president of Tabor 100, which is an organization that does advocacy work for inclusion for African Americans and the community at large. A lot of folks was coming to our Tabor meetings expressing the same concerns that you are expressing here today. And it wasn't an industry that we were involved in, but I would make phone calls down to the state to say, this is what I'm hearing. Folks are coming to our Tabor meetings. These are the concerns they're having. They're having a process. They're being left out. That there's no inclusion. So at the time that the governor appointed me to the board, it was after hearing your voices. A lot of you were coming down to Olympia saying you were being left out of the process, saying that there was no African Americans in, feeling that you were being excluded because of race. All of those, your voices were being heard in Olympia. So when a position became available on the board, the governor's office reached out to me to say, Ali, as representing the community in your other role, being a small business owner, knowing what it's like to run a business and understanding the challenges of running a business. With the state, they asked me several times if I would be on the board, and eventually I joined the board. So I joined the board with the thought process of hearing what had happened and people being left out of the industry. One of the first things that I did was to ask to understand the demographics of who got in. All of what we were hearing was based on what was being published in the newspaper. So the press was saying it was a certain percentage African Americans, it was a certain percentage white, but the LCB itself had not done its own data. And one of the reasons it took a long time, we eventually did our own, and it actually matched pretty much everything what was being published in the press. One of the reasons the data took a while for us to get and wasn't easy accessible is the race is only looked at when you have gotten to a certain point in the licensing process and you now have to do a background check. So it wasn't part of the application or anything where it was just right there visible to see what the race was. It was only after you got to a certain process and then went through the background check. So the employee that was gathering this data for me had to go through every application and look at the background check to see what the race was. But once we did that, it pretty much matched what was being publicized. And we just recently, I got the results as of January of this year, and it hasn't changed. And I was looking at the results for the city, and I was listening to the numbers that Sherry was reading. And it pretty much is still the same. 0 African Americans. It's showing Seattle has 49 licensed. Out of the 49 licensed, 88% is non-minority owned. So with that, and with digging into at the LCB, what happened, how did this happen, after going across the state, to different, across the United States. We went to New York, we met with Massachusetts, we met with California. Some of the same things that the city of Seattle was saying that they did. I did all of that. I personally went out, met with folks. We talked to Portland, who had put a technical assistant program together. And after gathering all of the data is when we worked with our policy people here and came up with an agency request bill, which is called the House Bill 2870, a social equity bill in cannabis. So that is how the agency request bill got pulled together from all of the research, from going to various states, listening to them and what they said they put together, what worked, what didn't work. And as someone stated earlier, right now, nothing has worked in all of the states. So we're trying to take all of that in, take all of those things into consideration, and put together our own agency request social equity bill. And that in that bill is going to include some type of technical assistant. It's going to include a task force that's going to do quite a bit of reaching out to the community, hearing your voices, and to put together how this process is going to happen once we start implementing what the bill is saying. Are you all aware of the bill, the House Bill 2870, and the wordings and stuff that's in the bill? And it's been changed since we put that bill in. I've lost count of how many times that bill has been changed. Say that again. You should probably just go over some of the basic. I'm happy to cover. And Paula is going to go over that. Yeah. So with that, and I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but we'll get back to it. I'm going to let Paula talk more about the bill.
Like I said, my name is Paula Sardinas, and I'll tell you how I came to have an interest in cannabis. My story is really simple. It's not any different than all of you. So yes, I'm a commissioner with the Washington State Commission on African American Affairs. I own a lobbying firm called FMS Global Strategies, but I represent you. My brother did 25 years in prison as one of the, sacrificial lambs of the war on drugs. I have been working for 25 years to change sentencing disparities and to make sure that cannabis or weed or marijuana, whatever we're calling it this week, is not treated like we treat crack and we treat other drugs. That's my history and how I came to it. In 2016, in Washington, I took on cannabis banking because there was an issue with not just, the cannabis industry, it's how do you bank the money? So as an African-American woman, in 2018, we passed 5928, which was the cannabis banking law. Then I worked with Cory Booker and I worked with Ron Wyden to make sure that we could look at these laws on a federal level and how do we get declassification. How this issue came to me is a couple of weeks ago, there was a bill, 2263, that would have allowed outside dollars to come into cannabis. We learned about the bill on a Sunday. I killed that bill in committee 4 days later. You can't bring in outside, You can't bring in outside dollars in an industry with this much disparity where women and minorities and communities of color are not represented. And so we went back to the drawing board. There were conversations about a social equity bill. Ms. Garrett is right, she has been championing this for years. A lot of times when people are working quietly and silently, their work doesn't get recognized and it gets diminished. Most of you have never heard about me, but if there's been a major cannabis piece of legislation, this black face is the person that's been working on it. In 2018, I passed a 50-state resolution at NCSL, which gave all state legislators the right to start looking at different social equity programs and looking at the cannabis law. We have gutted 2870 about 7 times, so let me tell you what the bill was and let me tell you what the bill is. When the bill was initially introduced, when legislation is first brought forth, it's a concept and an idea. The idea was, how do we do social equity? How do we tackle some of the culture and the issues at the LCB? How do we get folks some licenses? We did not like the bill. If you go to TVW and look at the bill, you see my testimony. I delivered a very strong rebuke of the initial draft. In redrafting the bill, there needed to be a substantial change in how the licenses were issued, the amount of participation from the communities and the stakeholders, and we needed to find what a disparate impact community was. On top of that, we needed to have millions of dollars allocated for what the city is saying when you get a license, how do you keep it? How do you get QuickBooks? How do you get legal advice? How do you understand regulatory compliance? So we worked and had 4 or 5 iterations of the bill coming out of the House. We have a new draft that's going to be heard on the 25th at 8 o'clock in the Senate. Based on some of the comments I'm hearing here, it probably won't be the last iteration of the bill. How does it differ? And talking to Shailene Title in Massachusetts and talking with some of the folks in the governor's office in Illinois and making 3 or 4 trips to California, they're all doing it wrong. You cannot piecemeal social equity by carving out large urban areas and saying some folks get this, some folks get that. In LA County, when they did social equity, 100 licenses went out to minorities. They were all Armenians. They weren't black. They weren't African Americans. So if you don't understand the data or understand the community that you're attempting to serve, then you're going to make that same mistake here. So I got involved with 2870 to say we need to have a statewide approach. That's 39 counties, that's looking at the war on drugs that began with Reagan in 1988, moving forward to 2012 when we passed I-502, and you need to overlay those numbers of disparate impact, but you also need to look at gentrification. We understand that the CD and Tacoma and Federal Way and Burien and some of the other areas in 2020 don't look like they did in 2010 when black folks were getting arrested. So we need to better understand when we're looking at that data today, where are these people dispersed? They're in Everett, they're in Puyallup, they're in other parts of the city, they're in Pasco, where we have bans and moratoriums. And what this legislation needs to address is, A, how do we make those people whole? What is the appropriate and proper number of retail licenses based on 556 being issued? What are going to be the standards put forth by the community and the legislature to get those licenses to you in a way that's not burdensome and overly cumbersome so that you don't want to apply? And then once you get the license, what are the resources that we owe you as a state from a dedicated marijuana fund to make sure that your business can be successful? And where are the resources that we need to allocate in your communities and in your counties in both high crime areas, but also high socioeconomic impact areas? In other words, you need stores where the money is and where the customers are going to buy, and you got to spread that out. And so that's what we're attempting to do at 2870. Legislation is part of a 3-step process. It's an incubator, it's working with your cities, communities, and jurisdiction, and then having the legislature do a law that directs the LCB to do something. This is a first step in what might be a 3 or 4-step process, but to have something statewide that's based on you all as a community, based on your voices, which you have come to me hundreds, if not thousands, and said, Paula, this is what we want, it is going to be one of the best pieces of social equity language in the country. We're going to go back to Massachusetts, we're going to go back to Illinois and California and say, in Washington, this is how you do it right. And so this is forward. You know, there's a lot of things that have happened that we can't change in the past, but what I'm asking you all to do is to trust us, because we want to move this issue forward. I hear you. You know, I'm not unlike you. I used to be you all. I hear you. I have family members in prison today because of this. I hear you. Reach out to me and let me know, how do we continue to move forward and get you something that's long-term, measurable, and sustaining in cannabis?
So I was asked to talk about, the reason why I was asked to speak this morning in part is because before being appointed to this position as Director of Economic Development for Seattle, I was also the Director of Economic Development for the city of Portland. And Portland approached this issue around economic development related to the cannabis industry in a very sort of unique way, and it was sort of on the cutting edge because nationally this was a new issue. In Portland, what they did is in 2016 there was a ballot measure, and the ballot measure at the local level for the city of Portland basically said, to make a long story short, it got moved around quite a bit, but it ended up with 3% sales tax on the cannabis. And that 3% tax every year would generate around $2 million a year. And the ballot measure basically focused on 3 different areas. One is public safety, and public safety is defined as police, fire, emergency services, as well as transportation infrastructure improvements. And the reason why that portion was included on the ballot measure was there were some concerns about people driving under influence, and so that was part of the ballot measure. The second part is small business technical assistance, which is some of the issues around economic development. We'll go into that in a little bit. And the last part is dealing with alcohol and drug treatment services. But the ballot measure didn't actually spell out how the $2 million was going to be split up. But amazingly, the ballot measure passed in 2016 by 80% of the public vote, so it was a unanimous support. Once the ballot measure passed, then there were local community citizen group that got together to decide how to actually spend that money, and that's where it got really interesting. Because one of the things that we learned about this issue of cannabis industry, and you all talked about this, there's a lot of history around this issue, about war on drugs, the issue around transportation safety, around social equity and economic injustice that's been going on for decades. So all those really heartfelt issues really surfaced at the city level, but $2 million wasn't gonna solve everything, but somehow we had to find a way to make it work. To make a long story short, what it ended up supporting is, from an economic development standpoint, the number one issue that, from a survey that was done, that the public wanted us to spend money on is actually dealing with criminal record expungement. There are many who are under the radar and have never been able to really break the cycle of poverty because of their records. And so the first thing that the public wanted us to do is use a big portion of that money to deal with record cleaning. And so a big chunk of that money went into that space. And once people have their record clean, then the public wanted us to then pivot those dollars towards economic development. And economic development is defined in a couple different ways. One is small business incubation program to help startups, so it's a micro enterprise and entrepreneurship related programs for people of color and women. And then the second part is workforce training, making sure that people understand the technical aspects of this industry, which is really, really complex because of, it's like a farming kind of discipline. And so there's a lot of disciplines to be learned, and that relates to public health issues as well. And so those are the main areas that the economic development side focused on. And I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to conclude with saying, Seattle is very different in a way that I don't think that you can pass a similar ballot measure because of your constitution. The Washington State's constitution is just uniquely different than Oregon. In Washington State Constitution, my department, is illegal for my department to actually fund small businesses, directly provide grants, for example. Whereas in Oregon, that's what we did all the time. So there are certain differences foundationally in the law that prevents similar programs to be developed in Seattle. However, there are some commonalities, and it's the history, it's about values, it's about social equity. So all those issues will have to be facilitated to draft the right ballot measure or to find the right funding sources here in Seattle. But legally, there are differences between different states that we would have to vet out. With that, because I only have 5 minutes, I'll just conclude there. And I kind of rushed through this, but hopefully you got some of it.
So now we're going to move to the portion of the questions and answers. So thank you, Paula. Thank you, Ali. So if you guys have your questions, we'll take that, Mike.
Yes, what I'm going to do.
Before we get to the first question, I want to go back to Chief Best's question because it didn't get completely covered. So I want to point out a few things, at least three things that's in the social equity bill. So the bill seeks to rectify that injustice in creating equity opportunities for starting a business in the industry for individuals most impacted by marijuana prohibition, and many of whom may not have applied at all due to the criminal history and due to lack of access of capital. The bill is to create a new social equity program in which a limited number of existing retail licenses would be made available within the social equity focus. There is a grant program to provide technical assistance for helping entrepreneurs get their business off the ground. The bill has changed quite a bit since it was introduced. And after a great deal of a collaborated work with you guys, with the community, with other state agencies, with Paula, the African American Commission, the bill is to focus on social equity applicants from disproportionate impact areas defined as neighborhoods with high poverty, high unemployment, and high rate of marijuana prohibition enforcement. The bill seeks to create a task force that's going to add two important elements. First, it will help the LCB structure the initial program created by the bill. And second, it's going to advise the governor and the legislators on what else can be done in future sessions to strengthen and enhance the program. I just want to answer Chief Best's question on the bill. Thank you.
And I will remind you guys to we're talking about marijuana and equity, so let's stay focused kind of on that scope. The community agreements are up there. Listen actively, seek to understand. Every voice is important. Speak from your own experience. And let's get started. Could you state your name and organization?
And please direct the questions to the panelists. We're only taking questions to the panelists. Comments to the panelists. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Adam Powers. I work with a lot of different organizations. I run a nonprofit of my own where we educate kids, bring technology. My main question is, it seems like you guys are very focused and doing a great job trying to make difference, and it seems like the way you want to make the difference is with data. And you're working with organizations to go get this data so you can make that data-driven decisions. I want to know, is there any plan, but I feel to make this equitable, we need to make sure the organizations that is going out to get that data are also equitable, meaning are made up of individuals who are minorities. So when you're writing those contracts and checks, we're making it to organizations who is getting data that actually is going to affect the community. So that's kind of where I was just wanting to give that comment.
My name's Matt Wilson, and I'm a social worker in King County, but I'm just here kind of representing folks in the communities trying to advocate for this. I guess my question is, I heard you talk about working with senators and people from other states, but I do know that, federal law supersedes state law when it comes to cannabis, and I know that they haven't kind of really voiced or put into place objection over state laws, but I guess my question is what happens if they do a roundabout and decide that they wanted to enforce federal law, and how are people of color in the communities and these new minority owners protected when it comes to federal law and not creating more disparities when it comes to criminal justice? And then also when it comes to financing because of the federal laws, because I do know that, federal-run banks and stuff like that are not allowed to participate in cannabis-run businesses. So there's green banks and all kinds of things, but I'm just kind of curious about
It's twofold. So both your DFI, all of your regulatory agencies, so DFI regulates your banking institutions, the LCB regulates your licensure. They are both still operating in compliance with the Attorney General here under the Cole Memorandum, which was drafted under the Obama administration. So in Senate Bill 5928, we specifically said, and that law specifically states, no state or federal resources in the state of Washington can be used in conjunction with a cannabis prosecution. So when the feds come in to serve a warrant, they serve it on your Attorney General. He would have to use state and federal dollars. The bill that I passed in 2018, which is Senate Bill 5928, Senator Ann Rivers was the sponsor of that. It prohibits your tax dollars from enjoining that. So in doing this type of regulation, we already laid the groundwork for that. We already anticipated back then Trump, Jeff Sessions-led Department of Justice. Today it's Bill Barr. So we kind of already preempted that in legislation in 2018.
Hello, my name is Alcidney Obel. I'm here on behalf of Seattle Urban League Young Professionals. I was wondering, is the city of Seattle prepared to fight a legal battle based upon race? Because as we've seen in Ohio, there was an incentive to provide race-based subsidies in their equity program, but it was reversed at the state level. And a lot of programs, well, the war on drugs was implemented on a race-based level, and there needs to be a race-based solution. So are you guys prepared to fight that? And my second question, my comment is, and you kind of addressed it, was gentrification has happened, and the historical communities have changed. So like, if you can give more detail, if you guys thought about it, on how you will find those communities that were those people, because now it's find the people who were actually affected by that policy.
Well, it's twofold. I can't speak for the city of Seattle. I can speak for the state of Washington. And the strict constructs of 2870, we looked at two things, two tests of constitutional scrutiny. It's called strict scrutiny. So we had to comply with I-200 and the 14th Amendment. I am very confident, having had 4 different civil rights attorneys look at this legislation, that we are strongly defensible in laying over the disparate impact language, which is why we tried to stay away from language that cater to specific race. But if I have 5 data subsets that says income, poverty, high rate of arrest, and then you sift the data, it's going to point to a certain populace. So there's a way that you can meet the 14th Amendment's strict scrutiny test and I-200 and be defensible at both a state Supreme Court level and a federal civil courts level. So I'm satisfied that we meet those scrutiny and those tests. What we've done, or what I always do, is I've been to all 49 legislative districts. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, no party affiliation. It makes no difference to me. I'm talking to all the different communities of color. We have a pretty good idea of where those people are. Like a lot of the folks that were forced out of the CD, they're in Burien and they're in SeaTac, and you know that they are. We know they're in Puyallup and we know they're in Everett. And so my goal with the task force is just openness, transparency, and intellectual honesty. That we know that those folks today are not where they were 10 years ago, but I think that that will become the work of the task force, and partnering with some of the different folks in the community who provide data, who do the work of the Urban League, who do the work in the community. You all will have an opportunity from a general broad perspective to participate in the task force meetings, which are public and open, and provide us with that information.
And so from a city perspective, I just echo what Paul is saying. We're using the same process. We have multiple city policies where we know that we can't touch certain things because of federal statute, but we can address things by using certain types of data to pinpoint communities of color.
And we do plan on working with the Office of Civil Rights, who we've been working with all along on this project itself, and the City Attorney's Office, and the Office of Economic Development, because there's so many parts to make this correct, right?
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. My name is Hayward Evans. I'm with the Washington State Civil Rights Coalition. I want to thank Paula, Ollie, and the City of Seattle for trying to launch this pilot project, which hopefully there'll be proportional representation within the industry throughout the state. But the position statement from the Washington State Civil Rights Coalition that's made up of over 40 organizations and community leaders that work diligently to improve the quality of life in communities of color. Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board would be required to ensure that people from communities that have been disproportionately harmed by marijuana laws are included in the new legal marijuana industry. These programs should ensure certain populations, particularly Black and Latino, are prioritized in licensing decisions for retail to ensure an equitable distribution of economic empowerment in registered marijuana licensed dispensaries, both of which will receive priority review. The Commission should provide the training and technical assistance in the following areas: management, recruitment, and employee training, accounting and forecasting sales, tax prediction and compliance, legal compliance, business plan creation and operational development, marijuana industry's best practice, and assist in identifying or raising funds or capital. Outreach. The Commission should allocate sufficient funds to ensure people from underrepresented communities have opportunities to learn about the legal marijuana industry by partnering with organizations throughout the state to create programs for outreach, technical assistance, workforce development, skill-based training programs, equitable employment and ownership, ownership opportunities for minority women, veterans, low-income individuals should be established immediately. Educational materials should be disseminated in multiple languages online through the Commission's website. Inclusion of underrepresented groups by preparing a diversity plan to promote racial and gender equity and including veterans and people with disabilities, and to demonstrate how the business will positively impact communities disproportionately impacted by high rates of arrest and incarceration. And finally, that there's a citizens review committee. The Commission would appoint residents in those impacted areas who will make decisions as to how that money is spent, and that a percentage of the money sold from those dispensaries in those communities are set aside to be reinvested in those communities that have been impacted. Thank you for your
Hi, I'm Maya. Adoption of legislation and implementation is two different things. And so I just wanted to know your take on the risk of living in I-200 sort of realm, how even if we pass this legislation, the risks of the fact that we can't affirmatively say that it's going to be for the Black community or for women or whatnot, what the risks in terms of implementation that you've already have thought of when this legislation passes.
And when we first drafted the bill, if you look at it online, every other paragraph said Black or African American. And we did that initially because the intent when we were in the House with that first Commerce and Gaming Committee was to send a strong message to the legislature that we know that it's been communities of color that have had the disparate impact, and they voted that language out. What happens with the bill, and the reason you have other iterations, is then you do have the civil rights attorneys in different groups from the AG's office look at it and say, it doesn't do any good to pass a bill that's going to be then struck down constitutionally. And so as we have gone through the process, we have then taken these communities and we have changed that verbiage to make sure that it will pass that, so you can implement it by looking at data points. A lot of data from the LCB, a lot of data from DOJ. We've looked at data from NORML, Black Cannabis Alliance, just different groups, and saying, what does this data look like, right? So that we can get to the people who most need the relief, but also make sure that we don't pass a bill on March 12th that becomes law with the signature or 90 days after the governor's signature, and put all these parameters in place, and then you're ready to go get the license, and then we're struck down. We have been very deliberate. I can tell you, Ms. Ollie and I probably have put into this bill 50 hours each. With the best lawyers, the best legal minds. It's very collaborative. Talking to you guys, I'll continue to talk to you to make sure that we deliver something to the community that you can actually use. So I know people don't have a lot of trust of the process, but I'm saying, trust me, we are doing our absolute best. You can go online and look at the bill. My information is on there because I've testified. It's public records. You can have my cell phone number if you stop me at the door. We're not hiding. If you don't like something, say something and we'll fix it.
Thank you.
Hello, Hello. My name is Aaron Bossett from the Black Cannabis Commission. I'm fighting on behalf of African American males, not everybody else, because we were the victims of the war on drugs, majority of the war on drugs. All that's history, though. My question to the city is, and not the state, thank you, Paula and Ollie, for your work in the state level, but to the city, this is their social equity plan, what is your rollout date? What are your funding mechanisms, and how long until this plan becomes into effect? And is the city willing to look at different ownership models, whereas versus if one person in here got the ownership license, we all work for that one person, that's not social equity. Is the city willing to look at worker-owned models and creating different ownership models within the cannabis space?
Thank you, Aaron. And as you know, we are still, this is part of the reason for this event today, is to get the feedback so we can learn some new ideas. And Aaron actually was kind enough to share that idea, that employee ownership model for a business. And that is definitely on the table for consideration as we move this project forward. Thank you.
I just want to add a little bit about, Paula, is that right? Paula said that, I know that you all don't trust the process, and I thank you for not trusting the process. You're what keeps us honest. I just want to name that one of the ways that this effort is being rolled out, or I don't need a picture, it's okay. But one of the ways that this is being done is through the Racial Equity Toolkit, and that current process is community feedback. And the Office of Civil Rights is probably the least favorite department of the cities, and partly because we ask the hard questions, right? We ask, how has history been impacted? How has power wielded its sword? And then what are you going to do different? And so the toolkit, I just wanted to name for folks who are worried about the data, one of the things that we require in the toolkit is a real deep dive into history and how white normative practices have been harmful to Black and brown communities. And so not just geographically, but historically, and what has it done to push people out, to push people into incarceration? How does other institutions play into that? How does the school district play into that? How does policing play into that? All of the things that we in the audience are concerned and worried about. And so when we talk about data, it definitely does go through a framework to contextualize the data. It's not just going to be numbers. It's not just something that is considered objective. Data is very subjective, and we put that subjectivity back into that data to make sure that it's historically accurate and that it's real about the expounded impacts on Black and brown folks, including when they move geographically, how they carry those impacts with them. And so I just wanted to name that one of the things we ask about is history. The other thing we ask about is how does gatekeeping and power function? And another thing we ask about is what have been the community's efforts that they had to put together because the system has been harmful. And so we look at all of those things to contextualize the data so it's not just numbers. So I just wanted to add that we do that work with these departments. They don't like us, but we do the work that we need to do.
Hi, my name is John Novak. I'm with 420, excuse me, 420 Leaks. I come from a community that has had no social equity since cannabis laws began here, pretty much, and that's the medical patient community. The LCB has been hostile towards us. We've tried to get equity, we've tried to get laws passed, and we've had nothing but, we've been called yellers, we've been called smellers, we've been ridiculed. The amount of corruption that we see going on inside the agency leaves me no reason to trust that you will have anything equitable for these people. I want you to look out now, and from what I'm hearing, only 13 licenses are going to be made available. So pick out the 13 in here and tell the rest of them they're out of luck. So the documents that I'm seeing that were just researched here recently, the gentleman pulled up at least 50-something licenses. So you're only limiting it to retail. Why? Why can't we have producers and processors? If you want generational wealth, you're going to have to own the genetics. So tell these people here the truth about what really going on. I have been through this. I have been raided because I was a patient. And I've been ridiculed because I have a hidden, you can't tell that I'm handicapped. I have epilepsy. It doesn't happen here with skin color. But for some reason, the equity stuff, we're not seeing it in my community. Why should they believe it?
Thank you, and I do want to answer that question. What I always tell everybody is read the bill. And so usually I don't have any notes. I'm extemporaneous because when you work on something, I don't need notes. I know it, right? So let me tell you what the bill actually says. This program will consider licenses that have been canceled, revoked, forfeited, or never issued. It's in the second paragraph, I believe, on the bill. You can look it up on your cell phone, Mr. Novak. What does that mean? It means that today there were 34 licenses that were canceled, revoked, or never issued. Some of those are in areas of bans and moratoriums. You can move those licenses through rulemaking. In doing my own research, we could find only 340 active retail licenses. This is public data, it's not Paula data. Subtract that number from 556 by my math, I count 216. What I've explained to Mr. Novak and others is that allow the bill to go through the process, but read for yourself. The reason there is no number in the bill is because we have to get the records, we have to work with the LCB and to say, of the additional pot of licenses, that original number that Governor Inslee and the folks put out, how many licenses did you actually issue? The way we fix that is to include, after the semicolon, and licenses that were never issued. You can put up to 5 owners on a license. So when I look out here in this room, my bill could put all of you on a license, Mr. Novak, and I thank you for that good question. If you've got other policies that you want us to consider, Paula Sardinas at Comcast.net. At the stakeholder group, when we talk about producer processors, you come to those stakeholder meetings and you talk about the different verticals and the different business opportunities in cannabis. It could be a consumption lounge, it could be a worker-owned model. You as the citizens will direct us, this is what I want. This is what works into my community. Do you need another bill in 2021 to get that, or can we do that through rulemaking? That's the legislative process, and we're doing our business in the light of day. We welcome your comments, we welcome your questions, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I will be happy to respond to it when I have time, but yeah, of course I will. I'll do you one better. After this meeting, I'm happy to talk to you. After this meeting, I'm happy to talk to you.
Hi, my name is Anthony Hall. I'm a PCO in 37th District. Been a member of this community all my life, a member of Sons of Haiti, and electrician, a commercial electrician for the last 20 years. Before I got an electrician, though, I was growing marijuana. And the reason why I got into it was the medical side. And I kind of empathized with my brother because I was concerned that I wasn't hearing anything. I read the bill early, and the bill had heavy legislation in it that was going to allow medical canopies to grow. And I didn't know where that went to, whereas we'll be able to get up to like 2,000 square feet or use the unused recreational canopies and failed licenses and businesses and whatnot. So I kind of wanted to, you answered that question a little bit, and I appreciate that. So I was kind of echoing that sentiment. But also the data piece, is your data going to be able to capture us, the brothers and sisters that lost their small canopies when we had our licenses with the city of Seattle? I went through the process to be a medical grower, medical/patient, and I had a small co-op there. So when the city changed the laws, we all lost our canopy. We all lost our co-ops, and that's probably the majority of us in here. Then we tried to go get stores, and we were told, no, I don't want that here by the owners. Then you turn around in that same space, now there's a store there. And so how does the data capture those of us that have been actually just kind of kept out by ownership, by high rents, or whatnot? I'm not sure if your data is going to be able to catch what happened to me or what happened to my brother up there or over there. You know what I mean? It's just, I just don't really I didn't quite hear it. I hear a lot of good things happening around it, and I appreciate it. Now the city of Seattle jumping on board. Appreciate Ali, and I appreciate my sister here, Pam. But I would definitely am concerned about the medical side. That's why I got in, just for stress relief and but not pain. And also, I want to know how you're going to capture that data that wiped us out. That's the part that wiped us out, is where they took away the medical. So.
Thank you for your comment. And what you're saying is most majority of what I was hearing before I actually got on the LCB board. So I went in and spent time working with licensing, working with enforcement, digging into getting to the root of what you're saying and what I was hearing, because on the outer, everything went by the process. And in the process of digging to see what happened, how folks that thought they were gonna get left out, there was a report done. And we had an outside person to come in and do a report. And when I read into that report, what the report clearly stated was that it wasn't racism, but it put a lot of emphasis on the process. And it put a lot of emphasis on, if you look at all of the requirement that you had to have in place, you had to have a location already. The entire process, you look at it, and the first thing I said, well, the first thing I see here is obvious who was going to be left out. So it was things like that that we had to work through to say the LCB did what it was instructed to do, going strictly by checking the box of what was given to them as what an applicant had to have. But when you really looked into it, was there more that could have been done? Were there situations where a phone call could have addressed what was missing? Yes. And that's why now we're trying to correct that, and that's how we were able to come up with, like I said, this bill started out being an agency request bill. So that was, I dug into it. The report clearly stated that there was a lot of misinformation, there was a lot of confusion, but when you looked at everything that was required that you had to have up front, you didn't have a CPA, you didn't have a lawyer, you didn't have paid staff to make sure every box was checked. And that's what this bill is now taking in account for. And that's why the technical assistance aspect is there. That's where the outreach to work with you to make sure the license process is not going to be that rigid going forward. All of that is covered in the bill, hopefully. And there's more, but we heard you. Yes.
Thank you, Ali.
Sherry, and Sherry, can you back Ali on that as far as how we did that as a city? She's talking about for the on the state level, but how we actually captured that data. Whatever, I got you. So we as earlier I mentioned that we did the stakeholder engagements, and the first stakeholder engagement we had was like this gentleman's telling me, is from business owners who had businesses before. So we are going to, I'm not sure if it's on our website now, but we are actually going to share those share the stories that you guys gave us on folks who had businesses before, how you actually lost them, and what you went through in the process. Like, we heard of stories that we didn't know about. We just seen the data, and we knew that something happened. So we had to reach out to you all and find out what that was that actually happened. We heard stories like folks were told to get a business first, without the license, go out there, get a shop, pay the 5 years for a shop, and then still not even be given a license, yet the money's been spent, $250,000 on a store, then come back and do some retrofit for another $60,000. So, we actually, as a city, asked the state, for that social equity program. So we're just waiting to go through the process, and before all that happens, reaching out to you. Go ahead.
Yep, ladies and gentlemen, I have a unique story. Maybe Michelle, she knows me for a long time. So I have a personal experience.
State your name and the company.
Yeah, my name is Sami Saad. My company name is under Sami Saad. It's being changed to 12 Green LLC. And the reason why I changed it, because I don't want to get in trouble with the federal. But when I get to this business, I was doing metal detector. I was a millionaire. I'll be honest with you. My fiance there, but that's not the case. I became here. So I really, that time when they tried to have the medical, I said, wait a minute, if this is health, I will add that business so I can help in the community, so I can take money and give to the community as well as I was doing for my own. But time by time, I lost that business, but that's not the case. And I was doing different business, working as a longshore, not taking a penny from the, whatever you call it, marijuana business or recreation. It wasn't recreation, it was medical back then. So we was donating. I tried to help homelessness and stuff like that. I tried to make it different a little bit. So even when we have the meeting in the city, they try to make the liquor board involved. Everybody was talking about money and how money, and to me, it was homelessness and single parents, because everybody knows a lot of women and their man left them. A lot of women, they have children and try to support. So I really want to support. So I'm not the best. I'm not the God of the people. But at the end of the day, I didn't get treated equally. When I applied for the liquor board, I had received a phone call from the liquor board one time to withdraw my application. I don't know why. So maybe I did mistake, and this is my own, and I will try to correct it, but they didn't correct it because I called multiple times. I was a category 1 because I've been in a business since 2009, even before I created this one. When I went to apply for this, they say there is no special license. Everybody know that. Get the, just what they call a resale license, and there is no special license. When they add it, it will be through maybe liquor board, something like that. And that's, when they have this 2012, 2013, something like that. So I fall in a category 1 already, and I've been in a business. So being pushed away, that's somebody don't want me to change my category. So now I am Muslim, I'm black, so I'm the only one to represent the Muslim community. So even if they issue those licensing, to me, are you gonna put me with a category 1, with one, which one? You didn't give me a license a long time ago, you have to give it to me now? Or with a category, which one? With my own people, I know I'm black, I'm not different than you guys or anything, but I'm Muslim. And this is, to me, is cultural. We use it. I'm Kush. So this is what we use. So why I'm just like everybody else, so I'm the first one, have this, you take it away from me. So when are you gonna give it back to me? That's my thing. So
Sammy, thank you.
I'm serious. I need my time, so I'm gonna fight for this. So don't tell me as a liquor board later, I'm gonna put you with this. So I need my license. I'm the first one. This is my story. If you guys wanna share this story, this is my story. Apologize, I didn't speak today I support everyone, and I wanna support this really. But I wanna make some different. Because everyone coming today, maybe, have a different purpose. Maybe you wanna help for your own self, your own purpose. I wanna help. And I want it for my own self, I'm not gonna lie. But at the end of the day, I have it since day 1. So are you gonna treat me equal, or are you gonna make me different? So don't tell me I'm gonna put you with this or this. I'm unique and different. I'm black like you, but I've been in a business before of all of you guys. So I need my shop. So that's all I need.
Thank you, Sammy.
And can you,
Hello, you guys. My name's Rick DeLove. I'm a board member of the Black Cannabis Commission. I look around, I see a bunch of faces out here that I've worked with for many years, and I appreciate all you coming out here, especially the state, the city, but the community. This is about our community going away in Seattle. A lot of you guys have lived here for many years and worked for many years. You guys want data from people who have moved away. When I was growing up, I remember hearing something that the black dollar stays in the community 6 minutes. Anybody hear about that shit? You guys remember you guys ever think about what that meant? It's not what you spend it on, it's where you bank it at. And so with all these plans that we're talking about, I understand we're gonna get licenses and consumption lounges, but is there any room for us to talk about banking and maybe a credit union solution to actually fund our kids' dreams? So as a community, which is dwindling, we don't have to go to Everett, we don't have to go to Puyallup to find us. We need to just go to our Facebook and link together and get us all in the same room and talk about making a bank. We can use this credit, we can use outside money, and we can use cannabis tax dollars to do this, but we cannot do it if we can't fill these seats in this fucking room. So I use that language to offend some of you, but we only have the iris is closing in what we want to do. And so if we all want to sit around and say what we could have done in Seattle and what it just mitigate across the nation, let's just go to Facebook and start showing some more pictures of food. But I'm kind of tired of it, and I appreciate everybody's here, but the iris is closing. So I ask you all, think about what I'm saying, and think about getting a bank for us out of these tax dollars from Washington State, and then we can put one in Illinois and Florida, and then that's how you will build a dwindling community. Please check us out at the Black Cannabis Commission. Thank you.
I have a good segue for Rick there. My name is Brandon Hamilton. I own a company called Wham Oil. We're one of the original extraction companies in Washington State. And cannabis is the hardest legal business in the United States right now, by far. There's no business that's harder to operate and survive in the entire country right now. And getting all the legislation going and getting people licenses and all that kind of stuff is the easiest part of this business. You have to be able to go out and raise capital to operate in this space. Any money or anything like that would come from legislation is going to cover minimal administrative costs and your attorney's fees, probably. I talked to Sherry about this a while ago. Anything that you guys kind of do, people need to be able to go out and learn how to raise money. And so I say it's a good segue from what Rick was saying. People need to know how to write a pitch deck. They need to go and understand their numbers. They need to go and be able to talk about their business, their future business. To operate a bare bones lab, you need about $500,000 just to get equipment. To open up a retail location, you're probably looking at, depending on what kind of the scale of it and kind of the finish and everything, you're looking at it's like 500 to a million, 1.5. To get a tier 3 grow going, you probably need $2.5 to $3 million of operating capital. You have to be able to go out and raise that money, and people need to go out and learn how to write pitch decks and get access to high net worth people. Because it's not going to come from the state, it's not going to come from the legislation, it's not going to come from the city. They might help you out a little bit with some funds, like I understand the legislation that's coming in, but providing access with the legislation, providing access to entrepreneur groups to learn how to pitch your business and how to raise money is critical. The state and the city can do all the work to get you that license, but if you can't go raise money, it's going to do you good at all. So.
I'd like to respond to that, and I'm pretty direct, so I'm just going to say this. As someone who's worked in banking, who's worked for Wells Fargo, who's worked for Goldman Sachs, who represented 90 credit unions protecting $60 billion in assets, with no disrespect to you, I really don't need someone that doesn't look like my community telling me about money. There is no shortage of black millionaires in the state of Washington. Since I have been working on this bill, I have spoken to more wealthy African Americans who are willing to invest in your businesses. Money was not the barrier for these licenses. People say that to make you think it's going to be so hard, nor does it take $1.5 million to open up a retail store. And so there are people waiting for you all to get access to the licenses. You won't need to look for the money will look for you. That's number one. The Commission on African American Affairs and several other business entities from your chambers are there ready, willing, and able to not only teach you how to do pitch decks, we can teach you how to do marketing plans, SWOT analysis, all that good stuff. That's what we do. We have 3 credit unions in Washington that last year banked $2 billion cannabis dollars. Numerica, Salal, and OB. They all have small business think tanks within their credit unions that if you want to get into the cannabis space, you simply go on the website, look up those credit unions, and you can email them. Someone will call you back in 48 hours. So money's not going to be a barrier for communities of color. That's a misnomer.
Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Yes, all of that. So I'm Michelle Cadigan. Professionally, I'm a PhD student at the University of Washington studying criminal justice issues. And I'm wondering, in terms of the fines and fees, like the money that has literally been taken out of communities of color disproportionately because of cannabis prohibition, I know that there's expungement going on, but what's happening with those fines and fees, those outstanding debts, the debts being paid? Is any of the money being paid back literally to people of the money they paid in, or that they still owe? Or is the debt expunged as well, or the collateral consequences like getting your driver's license suspended and those kind of issues because you have unpaid debt? What's going around that, the monetary issues that we can point to besides other kinds of collateral consequences?
So clarifying question, is that are you talking about the criminalization side of it?
Yeah. So if you get a misdemeanor conviction or possession charge or a felony conviction for folks who have been operating in the medical industry that have been stopped, or when they're transporting their products to their stores, the fines and the fees attached to that and the interest rates that have been charged for people, what's going on with that kind of money being paid back? Thank you.
No. So on the city side, we don't have an answer for you right now for that. That's something that we're thinking through, but we have not got there yet. Again, this social equity program has not even happened yet, so that's why we come out to community, get these kind of questions, and match it with what we're thinking about, and come up with that answer later. Thank you. So that is going to conclude the comment section of the program, and then Sherry's going to close us out. But just thank you to all of our panelists that came up today. We really appreciate you guys. And for our community, this is the work, right? Bringing the folks in the room that you really need to talk to, folks that you may not have access to before. Bringing these folks in here, you guys take this time and this opportunity to reach out to them before they leave.
And I want to reiterate again, thank you very much for spending the time this morning with us, and to all our panelists and the volunteers today, and Chief Best for coming out as well and supporting us.